Welcome to our first meeting of January 2022. This is actually officially our 1-year anniversary. Do you believe it? We chartered 1 year ago. It's so exciting. And we have gone from, I believe that we chartered at 11 or 12 members, right, Susan? When we chartered, I think that's how many we had. And we, as of today, because we got a new member yesterday, have 7 new members since last month, and we are up to 96 members. So very excited about that. We cover all locations as far west as York County, as far east as New Jersey and Delaware, some people in Northern Maryland. So we're covering this great big range, lots of people who are on a whole spectrum of the native plant world, from experts to just having heard the word native plants within the last week or so. So it's been really great. I couldn't do it without these fine folks. I am Jessie. For those of you who've never met me before, I'm the president of the chapter. Audrey is our vice president, and I believe that she is on with us tonight. Susan is our secretary. Thank goodness she does our highlights and our meeting minutes and keeps our Facebook page looking amazing and does just all sorts of great things for us. Michelle's our treasurer, keeps our money, which we have money because we haven't done much with it yet, but we will this year. Lindy is our membership chair. She reaches out to new members and people who are interested and want information about the chapter. And then Marilyn just gives us great ideas and encourages us to do great things. So we love this group of people that help us run this chapter. We are just in our first year. If you have strong ideas and want to help us make this chapter even better, please reach out to us. Let us know your thoughts, projects you'd like to do. If you want to head up a committee or help on in any of these chair positions, let us know. We have a YouTube channel. If you ever miss a meeting, because there's lots of Zoom things going on all the time and you have a schedule conflict, check the YouTube channel. We put our meetings up there. There's lots of great content and information there. Past speakers that have just been amazing and very generous with their time and knowledge. And we hope to be a resource for you. So that's always a great place to check out. We have our website, which Susan does a great job getting lots of information up there. We have lots of resources. All of our old meeting minutes are on there. So if you are not great at taking notes or just want to enjoy the conversation but want to go back and get the info later, check out our website. We like to give a shout out to our new members each month. And this kind of gives you an idea of the areas that we are getting new members from. And if you see your town on there and you want to connect with somebody who has just recently joined from that area, email us and we will get you guys in contact. We're not going to give anybody's emails out without their permission. But if you want to try and network within your communities to get open spaces filled with native plants, we want to help you do that. So we've got Jean up in Burnville. Berks County has a lot of great spaces that need lots of native plants. And she looks like she's got a lot of property to work with. That's very exciting. And then Newtown and Drescher and Media and another New Jersey person. I was actually part of an email chain today that someone is thinking about starting another seedling chapter in Northeast PA. So that's very exciting too. We have Ed, who took the West PA chapter and started that a few months after we started this chapter, and he's doing great things over there. So the more the merrier, the more people we have learning about native plants and putting them in the ground, the better. Every month we do a thought of the month, and Audrey is such a gifted writer that she supplies us with our thoughts of the month. She does not think her voice is going to hold out to read our thought of the month. So we are going to have Lindy come on and do that. And right before we start that, I just want to check the chat and make sure I'm not missing anything for anybody. Thank you, Audrey. And I'm going to have Lindy come on. I'm going to mute me for now.
All right. Hello. I have the thought of the month here, and it starts off with this month we are thinking about gratitude. Audrey, Jesse, Marilyn, Michelle, Susan, and I want to thank you for sharing our vision of a healed earth and for your caring hearts, open minds, and your willingness to make a difference. We are growing and learning together. We are grateful for our gardens. They teach us about the connectedness of nature and about ourselves. We appreciate not only what went well, but what didn't, because through adversity, we and our plants grow. We celebrate the abundance of nature and hope for much to share this coming year. We encourage you to consider keeping a garden gratitude journal where you can jot down lessons from your garden. Right now, I'm grateful that I left the coneflower stalk standing because the finches are enjoying their seeds and I'm enjoying seeing them in the garden. Gratitude is good for the soul. Gardens are good for the soul. As a way to show gratitude for the ability we all have to help heal the earth, please check out our chapter newsletter in a few days to learn about the Pledge to Rewild initiative by Wild Seed Project. Also this month, we are kicking off a new segment to our chapter meetings called the Tree of the Month. We will be choosing a native tree to highlight each month, usually from the National Wildlife Federation's Eastern Temperate Forest Keystone Native Plants list. We'll look at things like growing conditions, features such as showy bark or fruit, companion plants, and notable trees in PA. Our first tree is the beautiful sycamore. The sycamore is beautiful all year, but really shines in the winter when you can see its gorgeous white bark on the upper portion of the tree. Since so many sycamores grow along streams, they are almost like a beacon leading you to the water. The sycamore is a large canopy tree growing 75 to 100 feet tall with a spread wider than it is tall when growing out in the open. It has huge branches with exfoliating sheets of bark in white, green, and tan. The upper trunk and branches are smooth and mottled. The lower trunk is rough and tan brown. Male and female flowers are found in the same tree and are wind pollinated. Male flowers are red and wither and drop off the tree after pollen dispersal. Female flowers are yellow and mature into fuzzy fruits. The fruits mature into small, brown, burr-like balls that hang from the branches. Leaves are alternate, simple, palmately, which means just resembling a hand, like with spread fingers, and 3 to 5 lobed, coarsely toothed, and with a coarse texture. The sycamore is deciduous, but their pretty brown and curled leaves hang on through December, along with their small, globular fruits, sometimes called button balls. Sycamores thrive in wet lowlands, creek banks, and around lakes. They grow in coarse, sandy, and gravelly loams to moderately fine sandy and silty clays. They can tolerate poor drainage. Their best growth is achieved with a good supply of groundwater, where growth of 70 feet in 20 years is not uncommon. They can live 350 years or more. They are hardy to zone 4A. Full sun is best, but they will tolerate partial shade. With shallow, fibrous roots, they are easily transplanted bare root or ball and burlap in spring or fall with care. Companion plants include American sweetgum, northern catalpa, eastern poplar, black willow, river birch, silver maple, American elm, green ash, pecan, pin oak, box elder, swamp white oak, spicebush, itea, winterberry, and summersweet. Sycamores provide shelter and food for birds. Finches, juncos, and chickadees love the seeds, which are found in the so-called button balls, as the fruits decompose over the winter. Squirrels, muskrats, and beavers also enjoy the seeds. Woodpeckers, owls, and raccoons live in hollow trees, and 45 common caterpillars are supported by sycamore trees, including the white-marked tussock moth and eastern tiger swallowtail. And some notable sycamores in PA include the Pauling sycamore in Valley Forge, the Lafayette sycamore in Chadds Ford, which is estimated to be over 300 years old, making it a William Penn tree, indicating it was growing in 1682, and the John Goodway sycamore in Harrisburg, which is said to be 400 years old. And that is all I have for the thought of the month.
Thank you so much, Lindy, for reading that. I am amazed at sycamores, so I am so excited about that. Some of the chapter business that we wanted to discuss tonight was that for the 2022 chapter meetings, we have a theme, and the overriding theme that we're going to cover this whole year will be native plant design. And we're going to break that into 4 subcategories: the basics of native plants, fundamentals of design, spacing and selection, and maintenance and progression. And each quarter of the year, we're going to have at least one presenter that will cover this topic in depth, so that we can all, by the end of the year, have a really good, solid foundation of native plant design information. We've also started the Tree of the Month, which Lindy worked on reading for us, and we are going to pull most of those species off of the National Wildlife Federation Eastern Temperate Forest Keystone Species List. There's a link here, but that is a really great list if you're trying to make decisions on the highest wildlife value plants to put in your landscape. That might be a good place to start. We have a financial report that Michelle got to me, and unfortunately I did not get it in time to put it into the presentation, but our balance is significant. We have $1,100 to work with this year to do some great projects. We did one community project last year where we purchased plants and planted them at an elementary school for an educational garden for not only the students who were having curriculum built around this garden, but also for all of the parents and everybody walking by. So just as an education in native plants for people. And we'd like to do things like that this year also. The majority of our balance is because you pay to be a member of Wild Ones National, and we get a portion of those dues to our chapter to pay presenters for great presentations, to do projects like putting plants in the ground, for educational materials, when we do tabling events. All of those kind of things are where the money goes. We try and be very thoughtful about where your money is going. And if you have ideas about projects you would like to see that money go towards, shoot us an email and let the board decide and help get plants in the ground. We are really in need of somebody who can be an information coordinator for the chapter. Somebody who is already, like me, looking for native plant sales, open houses, workshops, festivals, events, webinars, outings, all of those kind of things, and can let us know as a chapter so that we can put it out there to people and maybe coordinate group events. I think we're each individually kind of doing these things anyways, but as the board members, we are also trying to get things in line for plant sales as far as the bulk order sales and things. So if we could have a chapter member who wanted to get on their computer and look for these opportunities, even if they did it every week or every 2 weeks, and then email either Susan, the secretary, or I, or both of us, whichever, so that we can put it out there to our broader communities. And a lot of us come from different neighborhoods and different counties that have different events and sales, and they just may not be easily accessible to everybody because of not knowing where to look. So if we had an information coordinator, we could maybe get even more opportunities out there. Speaking of opportunities, we're having our members only wholesale pricing on the North Creek order. The orders are due to Susan at the secretary email by April 15th. If you haven't participated in one of our bulk sales before, know that you have to submit in email the full name as it appears on the North Creek order form. Look carefully at their order form. Their inventory changes rapidly, and they have due dates, like when they are expecting to release their crops. So you have to make sure, that you're checking their inventory and that it's available by April 25th. That's what you're going to make your decisions based on. You have to order full flats, and you don't have to tell Susan what price it will be, because you can notate for yourself how much your flat is going to cost, but she will tell you, once the final order is in, if availability is changed or anything, so that you'll get your price information at the end. No cancellations. So if you place an order, you can't kind of change your mind or change, say you don't want the flats after we put in the order, because we don't want to make it a hassle or get any surcharges from North Creek. And once our order is confirmed, we'll find out if we need to do shipping or not. Shipping will be a small, I think it's like a $3 kind of estimated fee per flat added onto your total. If we don't have enough flats ordered to need to do shipping, we won't have to worry about that. You'll pay by check to Wild Ones at pickup. And I have somebody who raised a hand. Let me see. Let's see. Hardy Plant Sale. Sharon is saying they do a good job of plant sales. Yes. York Conservancy has an annual sale. Yes, I saw that last year and I sent that to our members. Thank you for that one. Mighty Oaks. Yes, I agree. We are going to talk about oak trees, and Doug Calamy is amazing. Yes. Okay, and I think that that's all we have for our chapter business, unless Susan or anyone has anything to add before we excitedly go on to our main presenter. Okay, so I have with us tonight Mark Riddell. As a master gardener of the Penn State Extension of Montgomery County, Mark has volunteered more than 5,000 hours conducting educational outreach about eco-friendly gardening, native plants, and attracting wildlife. He lives on a 4.5 acre area where he has established native plant communities in meadows, ponds, and wooded areas that have so far attracted 144 species of birds, 49 species of butterflies, 24 species of mammals, 21 species of dragonflies and kin, and 14 species of reptiles and amphibians. Before his retirement, Mark worked as both an environmental attorney and planner. We are so happy to have him here tonight. And for those of you who follow any native plant groups on Facebook, Mark runs one of the native plant groups on Facebook. And Mark, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong. It's Gardening with Native Plants?
It's PA Native Plant Gardening.
PA Native Plant Gardening. And just today, he posted the most amazing pictures of those species of birds and butterflies that he has attracted to his garden. It was lovely to see. Check that out if you're on Facebook. Mark is always so generous in educating people about natives. He's got a lot of great resources on his Facebook, that Facebook group, and I'm really excited to hear our presentation tonight. So I am going to mute and let Mark take over.
Okay, you have to stop sharing your screen so I can share mine.
Thank you. I am stopping sharing.
Okay. And let me just... Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Jesse, can you just nod? Yeah, okay. All right. Thank you, Jesse, for inviting me to give this presentation. I'm really excited to have revised it for a native plant group. I normally give it like to, general gardening groups. So it was really exciting to revise a presentation about botany, knowing that I'd be speaking to fellow native plant enthusiasts. And it really gave me an interesting perspective on how native plants evolved with the conditions within their ecosystems. We'll still focus on the botanical principles themselves, as well as the practical implications for gardening. But throughout it, I also laced in information about how native plants are always superior to non-native plants. So, okay, it looks like we skipped a slide. Okay, it's working a little bit slowly, sorry about that. First off, where are the handouts? Even before the pandemic, when I was doing in-person classes, for environmental reasons, I never gave paper handouts. So you can go to my website here, markmriddell.com. Perhaps Susan or Jesse can put that in the minutes that get emailed to everyone afterwards. And then that will take you to my website, and then you can just click on this link or scroll for the topic down here through the presentations, and it will open up this separate page. A PDF of the presentation will be down here. I'm This is the old version that's on there. I will post a new version sometime tomorrow because I'll no doubt catch some errors that I made as we go through it tonight, or in response to some of your questions or concerns. I may decide that I need to revise it to make things a little bit clearer, but I will post that by tomorrow noon, the revised edition. And then there'll also be live links to some of the sites that I refer to in here. So then let's plunge right in. Let's hold questions until the end. Just make sure I get through all the material for everyone in case people have to jump off. So the basic agenda is just following through the life cycle, average life cycle of a plant, and discussing different principles of how plants grow at each of these stages and how they apply to gardening. So when slide or text is in green, and I'll be talking till it'll be clear, I hope, when I talk. That's the actual botanical principle, and then why that principle matters for what we do with gardening is in aqua. Okay, first, was a plant. We always have to start from the beginning. It used to be that there were just plants and animals. The key takeaway from this slide is that not everything that used to be a plant is still considered a plant. The things that we think of probably most when we think of what a plant is that, the photosynthesis, they're green. They get their energy from the sun. They photosynthesize sugars for their energy from the sun. They have cell walls instead of cell membranes, like, animal cells have a membrane that's made of lipids and proteins. Plants have cell walls that contain cellulose. That's the fiber that makes them, that's a carbohydrate that makes them, the walls stiff, helps the plants grow and stand up. And also that's what makes the fiber for things like cotton. And also we're aware that they have no real means of self-locomotion, and they do not have like nervous systems like animals do. There are other sort of more detailed scientific things that we don't need to get into. And that's another point I want to say about the presentation, is that there's a lot of information in here. Some of it I'm going to scoot through because I know it's been covered in other presentations already given to the group, where it's not necessarily directly relevant to what we're going to talk about tonight. But I want to keep it in the slides in case anyone goes and actually looks at them from the website, so that you'll have as comprehensive information as possible. And don't know why it's a little slow here. Okay, so that first, the plant classifications here, this was one of the things that had to do with like at the seed stage. I don't know why that slide did not come up. But the plant seeds are helpful because they help the plant identification. And the reason that's important is, because it affects our cultivation practices. Plants, the basic structure of plant classifications fall within two large groups. As you can see, there are about almost 300,000 species of plants worldwide. The vast majority of those are what we call vascular plants, meaning that they have vessels within them that circulate the fluids, the waters and the sugars and other fluids with the sap that circulate within the vessels, within the plants, within these confined vessels, like our blood vessels. Non-vascular plants don't have those, but most of what we garden with, and in fact, most of plants, period, 93% of all plants are vascular plants. And then those are divided into seed-producing plants, which is why seeds were kind of important, because whether a plant even produces seeds as opposed to spores is an important division in the taxonomy. And again, most of what we garden with is the seed-producing plants, specifically flowering plants. It's really interesting when we get these dichotomous key kind of things, or these flow charts. It's easy to think that, they're evenly divided, the species, between the two, the two factors. But you can see that only like 0.03%, there are only about 860 species of, non-flowering plants, which includes all the conifers, which is really kind of amazing. You would think there'd be at least that number of species worldwide of pines alone. So again, most of what we're dealing with in our gardens are these flowering plants. Which are then divided into two major categories of the monocots and the dicots. So that's like about 89% of all these plant species. The difference between a monocot and dicot, the cot stands for cotyledon, which are the seed leaves, these fat leaves. Like if you open up a bean seed, you can see that it has those two starchy fat sides. Those are the seed leaves that provide nutrients to the embryonic plant that's inside the seed. So a monocot has one seed leaf. You can see here when it germinates, there's only one leaf, and a dicot has two seed leaves. And so the major groups of monocots, you can see here, grasses, sedges, some surprises, jack-in-the-pulpits, irises, you may not think of those, lilies, onions, trilliums, and orchids. Dicots, just about everything else. So again, most of what we garden with is probably the dicots. And the reason that's important is it helps practically with the proper identification, not only the plants themselves, but also of the seedlings. Like this is a shot that I took in my yard just like last year or so, when I normally might have thought that these were weeds because these little single-leaved things popping up near my trilliums. But it turns out because trilliums are monocots, they have one seed leaf. And so they look like they might be some kind of grass or something along those lines. So it'd be easy to weed something like that out, especially since the trilliums have broad leaves with branch veins, which is typically a characteristic of the dicots. So it's important, and this drives home just for gardening in general, it's always kind of make sure that you know what the seedlings of your good plants look like. And I always tend to, if I don't know what a plant is, I don't weed it out until it's grown large enough that I actually can possibly identify it. Another practical application of the monocots versus dicots is that some herbicides are selective, that they target only broadleaves or they target only grasses. I know some people aren't crazy about herbicides and pesticides, but as a master gardener, I represent Penn State University, and the position of Penn State University is that all of these things are safe if applied as directed, but it's up to you to decide whether you think you actually want to use them, but I will discuss them, from time to time. But like I said, there are herbicides that target these. So if you're trying to get just grasses out of your woods, like say just target Japanese stokegrass or something like that may have taken over an area that's primary broadleaves, you could consider using a targeted herbicide. And also there are different nutritional needs between monocots and dicots. The monocots, because they include so many things like grasses that really do not have showy flowers to attract pollinators, tend to require greater nitrogen levels than the dicots. So also within classification, it's really important to learn your botanical names. So when a botanical name is a binomial name, so it has like two words, two names, the first one being the genus and the second one being the species. The botanical names are always italicized. So a species is a group of plant individuals that can reproduce sexually, we'll talk about that later, with offspring true to the parents. So these plants are so closely related to one another that when they multiply, the offspring come out pretty much with the same genetic material, half from each parent. And then a genus is a group of related species. So that's the name of flowering dogwood here is the Cornus florida, and its common name is just said flowering dogwood. But so it's really important to learn your botanical names when it comes to precisely identifying plants. Okay, so within the species, there are also little subgroups called varieties. That is a subgroup within the species that also breeds true to its own parents, but it's not genetically different enough from the species to actually be a separate species. All it has to do with numbers of genes and chromosomes and stuff like that, that we don't know to get into. So we just have to trust the taxonomists on this, and they periodically change their classifications. These varieties, this is important for us native plant enthusiasts, can be either naturally occurring, and here would be an example of pink flowering dogwood, Cornus florida var, which stands for variety rubra. So this is a distinct variety within that species. Or they can also be cultivated, and that's what we called a cultivar, cultivated variety, or nativar, native cultivated variety. And those are named. So we can see this one doesn't have like a proper name, but the cultivars and nativars, usually ones that are human bred or that have been propagated in the the trade, they usually are named, and then they'll have a proper name that's in italics like this, and it does not say variety. It usually doesn't have that. So that's how we can tell when we look at a plant tag that whether the plant has actually been cultivated by humans versus whether it has been naturally occurring. So a hybrid is a cross of two or more species or genera, genuses, and hybrids do not breed true to their parents. So if you plant the seeds from hybrids, they will not grow true to their parents. In fact, a lot of times they go back to some freakish parent that was grown primarily for vigor, but has monstrous stems, like really copious growth and little flowers, little fruit, but it has such vigor that it was crossed with something else to get that vigor over to the hybrid that will have the showier blossoms or more fruit. So that is one key difference with the hybrids. They can occasionally occur naturally where the individual species overlap, but they're usually human bred. And so examples of these are like Dicentra luxuriant. And sometimes you'll see these for sale at native plant nurseries or native plant catalogs. And the parents are both native, but the parents of this one, it's Dicentra eximia, which is the kind that's native to the East Coast, the Northeast. And then Dicentra, I think it's Formosa, which is native to the Western United States. So those are artificially bred. So a lot of native plant people do not consider hybrids, even between two native plants, to be native because they didn't evolve here. Whereas a lot of times, certainly the naturally occurring varieties are considered to be native because they did evolve in this ecoregion. The reason that botanical names matter is that the common names can be confusing. We hear so many people call these different species of rudbeckia the same name: black-eyed Susan, brown-eyed Susan, orange coneflower, variations of that, but we don't really have the common names themselves can't really nail it down to the specific individual, which is really important when it comes to cultivating, to finding out whether a plant is actually native to our area, to whether it will, how it breed, how it will support local wildlife, interact with local other organisms. And if we're interested in preserving biodiversity of our native plants, we want to make sure that plants actually are native to our ecoregion. And then also how they interact with the other organisms, not only as things like pollination and seeds and stuff, but also evolution, because these organisms are always evolving with one another. Usually the consumer trying to figure out a way to better consume, and then the thing that's getting consumed trying to figure out a way not to be consumed. So they're always evolving with each other. And so the more that we keep these organisms that evolve within the same ecoregion, the more we are fostering the natural evolution. So moving on to the germination phase, we're going to discuss some of the process of actual germination and the triggers. So again, this is skipped. Okay, so germination, it means when a viable, so, one that's still alive, not a dead seed, dormant seed, so it's been sort of sleeping, sprouts. What actually happens is that water penetrates the seed coat of the dormant seed, which is inactive, and can last for centuries. Some of these seeds, they have they have to regenerate that are like centuries old, because the seed is just in this stasis. The seed splits open, oxygen enters the seed and starts the chemical reactions, enables metabolism, and then that allows the embryo to grow. So some of the factors that affect this are the water, the temperature, the presence of oxygen to start those chemical reactions, and oftentimes light, like how close the seed surface is, the seed is to the surface. That's not always true, but it is often true. The reason that this matters, viability, you want to make sure that you get seeds that are viable. They'll have like sort of a sell-by date on the back, and you want to make sure that, for maximum viability, because when a manufacturer guarantees the germination rate, it is based upon that sell-by date. So seeds, some of them will remain viable for longer periods of time, but the germination rate, the percentage of seeds that germinate, will drop off over time, especially since, our storage isn't perhaps always proper, not like some cool, dry, dark place, where not much is going on chemically. A lot of times they're just stored in homes where it's like too warm, they're exposed to more moisture. So the seed, the viability begins to deteriorate. So you always want to make sure that you are getting fresh seeds. And then that when you're sowing seeds, you have an understanding of the basic germination rate, like the percentage, how many will germinate, so that can help you calculate the number of seeds that you're going to need, especially if you're sowing a larger area. And then also like giving an idea of how many you're going to end up thinning out based upon that sowing rate. I know you guys already covered growing seeds indoors, so I'm going to skip through these. If anyone has any questions, we can go back through. So now we'll get on to the actual growth of the plant once it has germinated. As soon as this refreshes. I don't know why this is so slow. Okay, growth habits are generally, so these are not botanical classifications like taxonomic when we're learning the divisions like Monocot and Dicot. These are called habits. So the basic growth habits that we deal with as gardeners are whether a plant is woody. Usually that means that the stems persist above ground during the winter, or whether it's herbaceous, that the stems either do not persist above ground at all, or if they do, they're basically sort of like either dead or they don't actually have woody tissue. Like some plants, herbaceous plants, like some ferns and other herbaceous plants actually do, persist over winter, the leaves and some of the stems, but they are still soft tissue that if it got cold enough, they could die down. And they don't have actually woody, any woody tissue in them. Okay, why it matters is that woody plants, because they persist over the winter, they're considered like the bones of the landscape. So you're gonna be looking at them all year, at least the stems. So you really want to place them thoughtfully, because not only you're going to be looking at, they have that 4-season presence, but they're also a bit more difficult to move because they get larger, the roots are larger. So they're really important to place them strategically, because they're going to be there for a long time and they're hard to move. Also, especially larger woody plants like trees impact the light, the moisture, the soil organisms and other things for the other plants. They really help define what kind of plant community is going to be growing there. So that's another reason you want to place them carefully and consider them carefully, like which species you get and how they're going to interact with your other plants, because they really have a way of defining the plant community. Another really good thing about woody plants, especially trees, is because they're larger, they tend to have the greatest volume of plant material per square foot. So you're going to get the sort of most bang for your buck as far as like ecosystem and wildlife benefits by using trees. A lot of times you don't think of trees necessarily as like pollinator plants, but just think of all the flowers on a tree compared to like if you put an herbaceous flower bed in that same area, you wouldn't have anywhere near as many blossoms, though the blossoms may be spread out over a longer time. But it's still important to consider, especially when it comes to leaves for things like insects, caterpillars, the actual sheer volume of plant matter that is in your woody plants. It also, as gardeners, the height is practical for screening. These are some catbirds eating droops of flowering dogwood on my property, in keeping with our dogwood theme. Another reason that this plant habit thing matters is regarding the herbaceous plants is the different growth cycles. So these herbaceous plants, the woody ones are, almost de facto perennial because the woody tissue is designed to last more than 1 year. But herbaceous plants come in, 3 different basic growth cycles: annuals, where they complete their life cycle all the way from seed to reproduction within 1 year. Biennials do that within 2 years. The first year, they grow their basic vegetation. And oftentimes that it takes the form of a basal rosette that lasts over the winter, like either evergreen or semi-evergreen leaves. So that you want to make sure, another thing, you don't weed that out, that that you have a biennial, so that you don't weed that, that vegetative growth out, because it's going to flower in fruit or seed the next year. So they have a 2-year life cycle, and then perennials have 3 or more years. A short-lived perennials, you may hear that term short-lived perennial. That's usually one that lives up to about 5 years. And it makes sense for a lot of perennials to be short-lived because of principles of plant succession, where taller vegetation usually moves in, provided that the other elements are there to support it. So a lot of these perennials in a natural setting get choked out by shrubs and trees after a few years. Especially in a place like the Northeast, the Penn's Woods, there are very few naturally occurring open areas. So a lot of the perennials that were growing in our yards, where they grew in Pennsylvania, it was only in sort of like temporary openings caused by storms, fires, or things like that. So herbaceous annuals, the difference, another difference as far as like how we grow them, and there are a lot of like fantastic native annuals, like partridge pea is one of my favorites, and there are a bunch of other ones. So, so don't overlook herbaceous annuals or think annuals, I have to have petunias. There are a lot of like really wonderful herbaceous annuals out there. An annual plant invests because it's not going to live over the winter. It doesn't need to have great roots that can survive the winter and provide energy for the next year. It invests all its energy in blossoms and seeds, which means it usually has a pretty long bloom season. Once they start blooming, they usually go all the way up until frost. The disadvantage is that you need to start them from seeds every year, but a lot of them self-sow, and you want to make sure you don't, weed them out. But because they're sort of designed to be phased out, to be outcompeted by perennials that are getting those roots once they're established that will live the following year. So a lot of times you kind of have, if you're trying to keep a sustaining population of annual plants, you really have to keep your eyes on that bed and make sure that the perennials and woodies don't come in and choke them out. So you almost want to have like a little designated area for your annuals, or wide spaces between your perennials, to make sure that those annuals will be able to reseed and come back. And a lot of them kind of need recently disturbed areas for their seeds to germinate. So, but annual weeds like crabgrass are a little bit easier to control by things like hoeing, because if you cut off the top then the roots will not generally come back if you do that late enough in the season. And they're controlled by other things like pre-emergent herbicides or weed torches, something I see I should put in this presentation. Herbaceous perennials, on the other hand, perennials, on the other hand, the ones that come back every year. So we said they invest more energy in the roots, so they have those robust root systems. They generally have a shorter bloom time. So they'll bloom for a few weeks. You want to make sure when you plant them, you're staggering the bloom times if you want to have continuous blooms in an area, or that you're looking at the foliage as well to make sure that you have textural interest from your foliage. So they do have, you know, a multiple year lifespan. They can overcrowd themselves by spreading, so it may be necessary to divide them every few years. You know, if you're creating like a natural plant community, you know, it's part of the natural succession that some naturally elbow out the other ones. But if you want to keep them, certain ones that do not spread as aggressively, then you will have to actively, you know, get rid of some of the aggressive ones or divide them out. Because of their strong root systems, perennials are more difficult to move than annuals. You just have to wait for an annual to die at the end of the year. But perennials you have to dig up. And perennial weeds are hard to control. So ask anyone who's ever had to deal with Canada thistle. Again, you always want to learn your seedlings, because even if they're, your perennials are promulgating vegetatively by their, you know, spreading through their root systems or otherwise, some of them still may come up from seeds. So you always want to make sure that you know what your seedlings are going to look like. The reason that the perennial life cycles mattered also is because the hardiness varies from perennial to perennial. We know these USDA zones, hardiness zones, with the lower numbers being the colder zones, like at the northern part of our states, the higher numbers being the warmer zones with warmer average temperatures. Perennials are hardy within their native region. So if you are getting a perennial that is native to your ecoregion, native to your area, it's hardy there, or it wouldn't be native, it wouldn't have survived there. Pots sometimes, though, can be within like a microclimate, like, you know, maybe the edge of the hardiness zone. And so, like, for instance, if a hardiness zone is, you know, say like zone 3 to 6, 6 would be the warmer zone, and then 3 would be the colder zone. It may just be like kind of marginally hardy in that zone 3, like in the microclimate areas. So that's something that you want to be aware of. And because of the scale of the USD maps and the algorithms that they use, when you think of it, it's really kind of amazing that they're even able to map these contours this with this definition. You know, it doesn't include all those little microclimates that can occur at the border or within individual zones. Another practical application is that because containers are not bound to the thermal mass of the earth, they tend to get colder during the winter. So if you are going to overwinter perennials in a container, you want to make sure that they're hardy to at least 1, if not 2 zones colder to the zone that you're in. And then that way you don't, if you get them that hardy, you really don't have to protect them. Otherwise, if they're hardy in our zone, you probably want to protect those containers over the winter. But with my containers, I just leave them exposed, like out on my patio or whatever, because I always plant things that are a little bit, that I know are hardy a couple zones more than where I live. Now, the way that growth actually happens, we talked about the habits. The way it actually happens is through either cell division, where the individual cells split and multiply, or we'll see later by thickening and lengthening. So the cell division occurs in these areas like meristematic tissue, which is like stem cells in humans, undifferentiated you know, cells that then become differentiated to the unique part of the plant where they're going to be used. This meristematic tissue occurs in these distinct spots throughout the plant. And it's also in trees and woody plants found in that green ring, the cambium, the living layer beneath the bark. And this cell division is stimulated by hormones. growth also happens. So that was like multiplying cells. So you'd have enough cells for the plant to, get larger. But individual cells also lengthen and thicken. So that's how a plant grows higher, is the cells lengthen, or how roots grow longer or branches grow longer is those individual cells lengthen. And then the way that like plants, like that the stems thicken, that the leaves thicken, that the roots thicken is through thickening. And all these are stimulated by hormones, but thickening is also stimulated by movement from the wind or the animals, because the way the hormones interact with the movement causes them to triggers this thickening. Here are some of the basic plant hormones. I'm just want you to know they're there, that there are a bunch of different classes of hormones that are active in different ways, different parts of the plants throughout the life of the plant. So, it just, and you can see that there are a lot of hormones that are active in something like, basic growing and flowering. A lot of different hormones are active. And a lot of these are groups of hormones. There's not just one gibberellin, there's a group of gibberellins, and same with auxins and cytotoxins. The only one where there's really only one is the abscisic acid. I forgot to change that too. Okay, the reason that the movement of hormones throughout the plant makes a difference is because it affects, for one thing, when we prune a plant, we're basically creating a dead end. So that those hormones were flowing up here, stimulating growth out of all these little buds and everything up along here, and bam, we come along and prune it. So then those hormones pool up and go to the next available growth point, that next available meristematic tissue growth point. And so how we prune it then affects what is going to grow below there. So a lot of times that makes our plants bushier. And so when you're pruning, you want to look at the way that that bud is pointing, the next lower bud, because if wherever you cut, it's going to be that next bud that grows the most. So if you want your plant to grow, here we have two buds, one pointing outward, one pointing upward. If you prune here, and let bud B be the dominant bud, then that branch is going to move outward. So you're going to get a broader plant and opening up to the canopy, getting more sun into the plant. But if you prune off bud B, then bud A is going to be the dominant bud because bud B won't be there anymore. And then that one is pointed upwards and inward to the canopy. So you'll get a taller, narrower plant. So that can make a difference with your pruning thing, especially people in tight spaces who may need to prune their plants close to the house wall or something like that. Pruning, a lot of times we think of it as an unnatural process, but it also does, have a natural origin via like grazing animals, are always pruning things. Anybody who has deer or rabbits knows that. And also the weather through breaking branches, or even if the weather doesn't affect you, this specific plant may knock over another plant onto you that breaks off one of your plant's branches. Another way that the important thing to know about this living tissue thing is this scratch test for living cambium, especially if during the winter or something, there's like this plant, you don't know if it's dead or not, and you can't like really tell. You can gently scratch the tender bark, and if it's bright green underneath, that's that cambium layer, the living tissue. So at least that part of the plant is living. So that's a little test that you can take. Also, if you need to kill a large tree and you don't want to cut it down, you can girdle it. If you cut all the way through that cambium layer that went all the way around, you're keeping those nutrients and water from going back up and down in the hormones. So you're basically killing that plant off, at least from here up. It depends upon the species. Sometimes some plants will resprout from the roots, but you're certainly killing the plant from this part up. So I mentioned before that thickening is also stimulated by movement. So this has to do with, staking trees, which you don't want to do. You only want to stake a newly planted tree if it's going to fall over. if you don't stake it, so only stake a tree if necessary. When we do stake a tree, you try to do it only for about a year max. And you do it so that the trunk can still move. So it will thicken, or else it'll never be able to stand up on its own. So if you do 3 or more and that trunk cannot move, it's not going to thicken and it's always going to need staking. But if you use flexible ties and opposite pole stakes with the ties, then that plant's going to be able to move naturally in the wind and the trunk will thicken so that after one complete growing year, you should be able to remove the stakes. Also, if you're growing your plants indoors, I don't know if you covered this, and I've done this, you just like once or twice a day, you brush the tops of the plants, or you keep an oscillating fan on that moves them back and forth. So those stems are going back and forth and thickening. And that really drastically reduces the legginess of your plants when you grow them indoors, and gives you much healthier plants when the time comes to transplant. Another thing about hormones is auxin promotes root growth on cuttings. So if you're doing plant cuttings, a lot of times it's auxin that you dip them in before you plant them. And then also, ethylene for ripening fruit, and growth inhibitors are used in the trade. Sometimes they're not really used that much, like in the native plant trade, but it's more like in commercial trades for the uniformity. But a lot of growth inhibitors are the basis of a lot of herbicides. It's really surprising how many herbicides, I thought it was primarily pre-emergents, but pre-emergents actually do not have the hormones in them. It's all the other ones, because the way they kill the plant is actually by keeping it from growing, by interrupting the hormones. They actually keep the plant from growing, so it dies. That's why when you spray something, it can take a couple of days for it to die. Growth responses, they include phototropism, which is going towards light. The reason that that's important is that, plants at the edge of the shade will often bend toward the light. So if you have a plant too close to your house, will bend outwards and try to get away from your house, or a plant that's at the edge of the shade, a tree, will lean outward. So that's the phototropism response. You want to make sure that you site the plantings accordingly. Either try to get them sort of like in the middle of the shade so it's even, but anything that's towards the edge of the shade, it's going to be generally reaching for that light. And also, if you grow plants in containers, you want to rotate them if you want the plant to have evenly distributed vegetation and stuff. Thigmotropism is growth stimulated by touch. That's important when it comes to knowing how your vines grow. If they have tendrils that need to wrap around a trellis, or whether they adhere, so things like that would be like Passiflora incarnata, the maypop, or whether they have like pads that adhere, or little rootlets like poison ivy that can just grow up a wall because they adhere. They don't need to wrap around anything. So just because you get a new vine doesn't mean you need a new trellis. You only need a new trellis if it grows by twining, and you can grow a vine, other vines, just like right smack up a flat wall or the side of a tree or something. And also that's how roots move around rocks, which is kind of interesting. Gravitropism is the response to gravity, both growing up and growing downwards, the roots going down and the stems going up. That means practically that there's no upside down for when you plant your seeds and your bulbs and corms and all those things. The plant roots know which way to go and the stems know which way to go. So you don't have to worry about all your bulbs being pointed up in the same direction, when you plant them. Other growth influencers are the photoperiod, the ratio of the day to night. That affects actually which plants can grow where, because the length of that, that amount of light affects the bloom time more than temperature does. A lot of times we think it's temperature that triggers blooming, but it's more often it's the length of the available light. Also, another factor related to that is the growing degree days, with a number of days with an average temperature above a specific temperature for that individual plant. So it's like how many days are above 50 degrees that triggers like maybe the opening of a blossom. It has to have so and so many days above a specific numbers of degrees. And so that affects the timing of the plant and, either pests or other animal development, the organisms that they interact with. So that's why that's important. It varies from species, and that's used in phenology, which is studying the life events of different organisms and how they species occur at any given time. Like when you see, like say the crabapple blossoms are opening at the same time that, you see your first robin or something like that. So these different, species that are targeted by the same, cycle in the light cycle, that those things that occur at the same time, that's called phenology. The reason that this light thing matters is that all these organisms evolved within these ecoregions. So the point I really want to get at here, then, ecoregion is more than just your zone, your growing zone, because a lot of people just think, oh, well, the plant's hardy here, it's got to be meant to grow here. No, an ecoregion is geographically defined, and it has much more than just the temperatures. It has to do with the length of the day, the amount of precipitation, the type of ecosystems throughout, and the other species throughout. So it's a lot more than just the zones, how warm it is and whether something is hardy here. Just because something is hardy here doesn't mean it's supposed to be here. It should have, ideally evolved within your specific ecoregion, a map of which is here. So native plants, because they have adapted to the local growing conditions and the organisms that they interact with, they generally require less maintenance if they are properly sited, and they support local wildlife better and are supported by local wildlife better. Photosynthesis, is like I alluded to earlier, is the manufacture of the actual food that the plant uses. A lot of times, they even call it plant food, when you go and buy fertilizer, but it isn't food. Those are like nutrients. They're kind of like vitamins are for us. It's not food. It's not like the calories that we burn for the food that we burn and count calories, for the energy for our activities and our metabolic activities. Plants burn sugars that they produce through photosynthesis, and they burn that through a process called respiration. So that's the basis of photosynthesis. The reason that matters is it supports all life on Earth, that all the energy from the sun gets to other organisms, basically terrestrial life, like through plants. And so that really affects the entire food chain, is like, tied into photosynthesis. Plants need specific amounts of sunlight to grow. They evolved with these conditions. So full sun usually means over 6 hours, full shades less than 6 hours, part sun, part shade is in between, those two. The other important point, as I alluded, is fertilizer is not food and can't make up for lack of sunlight. So if you have a plant that requires full sun that is in a shady spot, you can't just give it more plant food and it's going to do great. It needs the sun to manufacture the sugars that it actually is going to use to grow. So that's the importance of the right plant in the right place, because leaves are actually designed to photosynthesize plant for that food, given that the amount of sunlight that the plant needs and gets. Transpiration is the movement of water through the plant. It is in large part passive, though there is an active component getting the water into the roots down here. That does take energy, but the evaporation up at the top that causes some of the capillary action is passive. Water moves up. We talked about the vascular tissue, moves up through the xylem. Food and nutrients move down and back up through the phloem tissue, which has these little cell end caps that keep the the fluids from just like going down by gravity. So the reason that matters is that we see our plants wilt, and it helps us figure out why our plants wilt. The plants can wilt from too little water, so that water is not even getting into the plant, like the soil is dry. oddly enough, they can wilt from too much water because there's not enough oxygen. The soil is so saturated that doesn't have enough oxygen for that respiration that was required to take in the water. I told you that the absorbing water did require some energy produced through respiration. And if there's no oxygen in the soil, the plant can't do that respiration that it needs. It can also be, wilting can be caused by too hot of conditions where the water evaporates off the leaves too fast so that it can't keep up with it. So even watering like crazy isn't going to help because it's not a lack of water issue. Sometimes it's just the plain old heat, even if the soil's wet. In that case, you do not want to overwater because then you could compound the problem by doing the too much water thing. And also say sometimes if it's too humid, even if it's not too hot, just the humidity in the air prevents that evaporation. And then those are the cultural factors. And then also, of course, disease, like if some disease causes that vascular tissue to clog, it can't, transpire, and, that will also cause wilting. And the evaporation rate through the soil is also affected by the, the type of container that you grow your plants in. Let's see. So now we'll move on to reproduction. Sexual reproduction, you can imagine when I taught this to high school kids, this was a fun slide. You had to give everyone a few minutes to stop giggling, but I hope that's not the case with you guys. So sexual reproduction is, even in plants, it is the fertilization, the production of fertilized eggs by, a germ cell from the male, which is actually called a sperm cell, and into a female egg cell, and it forms a zygote, a fertilized egg. That's the sort of scientific place, in a nutshell, the scientific terminology. In seed-bearing plants, which are the ones that we deal with mostly, the fertilization of the egg cell by the sperm cell is the sperm cell was carried in a grain of pollen. And then that produces the seed, the zygote, the multi-celled seed. And spores, which they're very difficult to propagate, plants that reproduce by spores, it's a different process. There is sexual, reproduction involved, but actual spores, ironically, are produced asexually. That's really super complicated, more than we need to get into here. But if you're interested, you can look at the difference between meiosis and mitosis here until you fall asleep. Okay, we talked about pollination. In order for that male sperm cell to be carried over in the pollen, it's got to get to the female, it's got to be, that's what pollination is when the pollen that carries the male sperm cell actually gets over to the female reproductive parts. So boy parts meet girl parts through pollen. Pollen is carried by animals, wind, or water primarily. So what happens is when the grain of pollen gets over to the female reproductive parts, it sends down this pollen tube. So the pollen lands up here at the top. It sends down this pollen tube, and this is where fertilization occurs, where that actual egg cell gets fertilized by the male sperm cell. So in fruit-bearing plants, the ovules become the seeds. These little ovules, which contain the eggs, become the seeds. And then the ovary, and sometimes some of the other attendant parts, basically becomes the fruit. Self-pollination is when the pollen and ovule are from the same plant, the same flower. So like if this flower, a grain of its own pollen gets on its own female parts, it can sometimes pollinate. That's self-pollinization. And of course, there's no real genetic, exchange of genes there. Cross-pollinization is when pollen and ovules are from different flowers, whether or not those flowers are on the same plant. Another important thing to know is it takes one pollen grain per seed. So in order for all these little ovules to, become, seeds for their egg cells to be pollinated, you need 1 grain of pollen, at least 1 viable grain of pollen that's able to make it all the way down there and fertilize them. So 1 grain of pollen is not going to fertilize all these seeds. You need 1 grain of pollen per seed. Okay, flower types. This is some sort of like important terminology that unfortunately we do have to, like some ways botany reminds me of history, where it seems like there's just a lot of learning of facts and names. But here you do want to know a couple of these, what these words actually mean. A complete flower has all the parts to it. All the, parts we see here, petals, stamens, boy parts, girl parts, the whole kit and caboodle. An incomplete flower is missing some of those parts. It can be like it's missing the petals. So it only has the reproductive parts. That's a specific design. An example is that is the flowers at the center of a composite flower, like the center of a daisy or an aster, that one yellow center is like hundreds of little flowers that are reproductive but don't have showy petals. And what look like the petals are actually flowers that just have big petals and no sexual parts. So those can be called imperfect parts. Now, perfect flowers have functioning both male and female parts. Perfect plants. Now this is, the part that's actually kind of you want to pay attention to. The perfect plants have all perfect flowers, so they have both male and female parts in the flowers all over that whole plant. So those plants are able to, fairly freely pollinate with one another. Dioecious plants, these are ones you really got to know. Each plant has only male or only female flowers. And examples like hollies, junipers, there are a lot of other things, spice bushes, sassafras. So you want to know whether or not your plant is dioecious if you plan to have it for fruit, fruit for the birds or whatever, or any kind of seeds. So you want to make sure that you get at least 1 male and 1 female plant of dioecious species. Monoecious plants have separate male and female flowers on the same plant, so you don't have to worry about those as much. And then there are plants that are just like have kind of like, they can sometimes be bisexual and sometimes be monoecious or dioecious, and those are polygamidodioecious, like maples. And so we'll move on to the different types of flowers in seeds, just so you get an understanding of how flowers turn to seeds. We talked about that. The different kinds of fruits are, like fleshy fruits, that we eat a lot of those. And then the dry fruits, which are either splitting or not splitting. And then within the seed, you can see the different parts of a seed. We talked about the cotyledons, the seed leaves, and there's the little embryonic plant. This is just more for your basic reference. Seeds disperse in different ways. Sometimes the capsule, like there'll be a capsule that pops open and scatters the seeds. Sometimes they need to be dispersed by plants, either by adhering to fur or feathers or our clothing. They can be dispersed by eating. The plant eats the berry, eats the fruit, and disseminates the seeds. Or sometimes through caching accidentally, like the squirrel or somebody comes and buries the plants in the seeds and then forgets where it was, or doesn't get around to eating them. The default is gravity. If none of these works, the seeds will just like drop off and just won't disperse wide and far. So that's always the default sort of dispersal strategy. Some plants also, dissipate by water. They either like, lotuses that are kind of designed to be in bodies of water, or tiny seeds, things like lobelias that will go in stormwater because the seeds are so small they can scatter by the wind, but they can also run over the surface of the ground in surface runoff. And some seeds are designed to be disseminated by the wind, and oftentimes they have neat structures that enable them to do that. The reason this matters, that this whole sexual reproduction stuff matters, we talked about the dioecious plants, and here's how you tell the difference between, like, this would be the male plant, because you can see that it has very prominent male parts, the stamens, and this would be the female flower, where you have like the prominent female part, the piston in the middle here. And so this is like, if the plant doesn't have berries, so it's a good time when if the nursery you're going to doesn't label the plants, because a lot of times you just get them in, or they're growing them from seed and plant hasn't bloomed yet, or the labels fall off or something, if it's a straight species. Then it's a good thing to visit with your little magnifying glass loupe during blooming season and sex the plants yourself. And this is the general thing that you look for: the presence of active stamens for the male plants, or of active viable female pistons for the female plants. And genetic reproduction is really important for sexual reproductions, important for the genetic variation among the individual offspring. That's kind of how evolution occurs, and that's like a big thing with native plant people. We like when possible, to have our plants that are produced sexually, like, they've grown from seed, so seed grown plants, because they have the most genetic diversity, which is, keeps up with the natural evolution and helps guard against, pests and diseases, things like that. Okay, we talked about dispersal. The reason that means of dispersal can matter is some of them are just need specific animals to disperse. Like, you may not realize, but like a lot of spring ephemeral seeds are dispersed by ants. And then the plants evolved to be dispersed by certain animals, and they repay the animals with having nutrients specific to those plant needs. These are, again, the dogwoods in my yard. We got like a chipmunk eating these fatty dogwood droops, because it needs to put on fat to hibernate over the winter, because it's not going to be eating all winter. And a scarlet tanager, young scarlet tanager here, needs to build up the fat in its body to have energy to migrate. So these plants actually developed these specific nutrients to attract the animals that they need to interact with, that will help with their seed dispersal. Most plants, 80% of flowering plants, are pollinated by animals. A large part of that is insects. So insects evolved a lot of times to pollinate specific plants, and the plants rely on those insects for pollination, and the insects rely on those plants to get the food that they need. So the reason this applies is that the one reason we want to minimize the use of anything that could kill our pollinators. So any kind of toxic herbicides or pesticides, even if they don't have direct impacts, a lot of times they have indirect impacts that can weaken the pollinators and make them more susceptible to diseases and pests. Vegetative reproduction is asexual. So that's basically producing little clones. That happens in nature. It also happens a lot in the trade, and we do it in our own gardens. It's faster because you already have the little plant. You don't have to wait for it to grow from seed. And it's, a little bit more reliable, because you don't have to worry about viability. They, die off of the seeds and everything. The disadvantage of it is the asexual is that it has no genetic diversity. And so and that's like really important for dioecious plants in particular. Like, you could divide, you think, oh boy, I'm just gonna like start all these, these winter berries from cuttings, but oops, they're all male. So you don't have any that are like female that are gonna like berry. So you have to know that. And also bisexual offspring might not cross-pollinate. So, sometimes you need two individuals in order for them to actually pollinate. It's, this thing against the plants don't like to self-pollinate. But vegetative reproduction is commonly used in the nursery trade. So it's important to know when you're buying a plant, whether it was, grown from seed or whether it was vegetatively propagated, if you're interested in, the genetic diversity and in the cross-pollination. And so seed propagated plants are preferable, or at least plants from different parents if you are getting vegetatively propagated ones. So that was reproduction. Now we will quickly cover death. So what happens when a plant dies is it starts to decompose, but that's Mother Nature's, that is the ultimate recycling, is the recycling of all the nutrients that that plant has been absorbed from the soil, stored here in its tissues throughout its lifespan. Now it dies, and those return back down to the soil, where they are decomposed and then made back into nutrients that can, help grow new plants. So it's really is the ultimate recycling. And the point I want to make here is, that what happens below ground, having healthy soil with active organisms, is every bit as important as what happens above ground. In fact, there are more living organisms in the soil than there are above ground. Let's go to the next slide. So the nutrients in the soil, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, are the major ones that have different impacts on the plants. So there are also macronutrients. Native plants, because they evolved in that area, generally don't need that much fertilization, but you should still know what these nutrients are in case there's ever an issue with a plant not growing properly and you've ruled out other things. It could be a nutritional deficiency. Availability of nutrients is affected not only by those soil organisms, but also by the pH, or the acidity of the soil. It's because the nutrients have to be in the right form to be absorbed by the plant. So just because you have nitrogen in your soil doesn't mean it's the right form of nitrogen to be absorbed by that particular plant. Some different plants prefer different forms, chemical compounds of, of nitrogen or phosphorus or potassium in order for them to be absorbed. And that's a lot of times affected by pH and by the soil organisms, the way that they have decomposed the nutrients in the organic matter. So native plants evolved with the local soils and organisms. So they have evolved to absorb those nutrients based upon the local soil acidity and the local soil organisms. So that's another reason that they require less maintenance, and they generally don't require fertilizer once you've properly established them. So another reason this matters is we want to maintain our active, healthy soil. We don't want it compacted. Compacting interferes with the, breakdown of that matter, and with the, we saw before the lack of oxygen. It interferes with the whole nutrition cycle. So we want to maintain good soil structure and avoid compaction or overly saturated soils. Another important thing, right? We talked about you not needing fertilizer. When you have native plant gardens, you usually, Mother Nature knows what she's doing. So when in doubt, what would Mother Nature do? She always makes sure there's a nice layer of organic matter on top of the soil. In a thriving native plant community, natural plant community, in the woods, there's this nice leaf litter. In open areas, there's sometimes it's called thatch. There's other dead vegetative matter on top of the soil. So that's what happens. You have this natural layer of vegetation that slowly decomposes as the soil organisms are active. At the same time that the roots are active, they respond to the same stimulus of warming temperature, longer days. Soil organisms become active. They break down those nutrients naturally when the plants need them. So if you maintain that nice layer of organic matter on your soil surface and just let it slowly decompose on its own, you don't need to till the soil. You don't need to put on any fertilizers or anything. You just have this nice natural little ecosystem going. So you want to leave the leaves, including the stems and the branches. In the fall, you don't need to do garden cleanup. That's why I don't teach classes on fall garden cleanup, because you don't need to do it. In native plants, you only need to remove material that you know is going to be harboring diseases or pests. Other than that, you just leave it there to naturally decompose. It makes fall preparation so much easier. And also another thing is that the type of mulch you apply, you want it to like sort of like imitate the natural litter that is found in your plant community. When I took a class in tree biology, the professor said, like, you know, if he had his way, landscapers would just run the entire tree with the leaves, the roots, the bark, the stem, the branches, everything through that shutter, you know, to the extent they have to bull down, it's down the plant. And then that's what you would use for your compost, for your mulch, because it has all the nutrients in it, all the plant parts. So that's the idea, like for forests, you want all those sort of plant parts. So for herbaceous, here are some mulches that you can look at. And for woody plants, here you want to make sure that you include not only some of the herbaceous stuff like the leaves, but also some of the woody matter. I just want to point out too, that a lot of our shade plants are used to growing in the woods. They're used to getting their shade from the woods. They're not used to getting their shade from a house. Or, you know, so they want the kind of soil that is found in the woods. So with my shade gardens, I always make sure that I have woody material in there. Even if I don't have any shrubs or trees that's creating the shade, I make sure that I have some kind of woody material in that vegetative layer on top that will decompose and support the organisms, specifically the fungi, that these plants evolved with in their natural community. You don't want the mulch too deep. If you go over 2 inches, you're inviting voles if you have problems with voles. But nature abhors bare soil. That's an invitation to invasive plants to come in and for their seeds to germinate. So it's nice to have a living cover over everything and to have this vegetative matter. And then you put mulch where over bare soil when you need to. In summary, I just did this table like about an hour or two ago for the first time, because as I was thinking through, you know, I just realized all these botanical principles and how they kind of apply uniquely to plants and what's in an ecosystem. You know, what makes an ecosystem, the uniform solar radiation, average temperatures, temperature high and lows, precipitation, ecosystems, blah, blah, blah. And then these are the different ways that native plants have evolved specifically with each of those criteria, and then how they in turn benefit like organisms. This enables them to benefit the native organisms. So that sort of concludes the presentation. Here are some of the links. These are live links on my website that I recommend. The Botany for Master Naturalists. There are a lot of online botany textbooks. You can always Google or, you know, use another search engine, not paid by Google, to look for botany textbook. This happens to be one that I found helpful. I love good graphics that explain things in simple ways, and this is one of them. Then actually the whole series of botany articles from the Encyclopedia Britannica is really good. You can just link to the main botany thing and it has a table of contents that takes you down to all the individual things. And then just for your use, a glossary of plant anatomy. And with that, we'll take any questions that you might have.
Mark, thank you so much. Okay. I love botany. I'm a big plant nerd. And one of the best pieces of your presentation personally that I found was your tips on pruning and explaining why you're picking which bud to prune from. So I don't know if other members are as prune unsavvy as I am, but I thoroughly appreciated that explanation because it made more sense than any other way I've heard it put.
Oh, thanks.
I'm gonna check the chat. I had people saying thank you so much, Mark. Does anyone have any? Oh, Zach, I think has a question. Go ahead, Zach. Unmute whenever you are ready.
Sure.
Oh, is that the Zach Lehman?
Zach. Hi,
the
Mark.
Zach from IT database fame. Nice
yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. The only thing I'm good at is data, not a botanist. Let's put it that way. So I planted 3 pawpaws like a couple months ago, and and I planted the top of the like dirt of the container level with the ground. And
Mhm.
I thought that was the right thing to do. Then my neighbor, who knows more about plants than me, says, no, I made them too shallow. That's too shallow. And the flare of the root, then the flare of the trunk should be a little bit above the ground. And if you see healthy trees, there's a flare of the trunk. And he said, even going an inch too shallow, it will put a tremendous amount of stress on the plant. And he's even telling me to dig it up and raise it. He's so concerned about it. And I didn't know to be careful with that. So it's like in the picture that you showed for planting trees, I can kind of see maybe they're making that point if you want to go back.
Yeah, let me see where that
And
was.
so I'm like, I can't believe I did that wrong.
Um,
So it's a question comment.
Yeah,
know?
yeah, you got to like first make sure that that is true, that, you know, you have to
Yeah.
actually find out where the actual root flare is. Oftentimes it is at the surface that it was in the, you know,
Oh, really?
the,
All right. All right.
container. So the root flare, I don't know if it showed it on this, but
It
if
did
you
a
look
little
on-
tiny bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I know you're part of the, you know, the PA Native Plant Gardening. We do have a graphic on there that shows
Okay,
exactly
okay.
where the root flare is. And yeah, see, this doesn't necessarily really show it. The root flare is
Yeah.
basically where the top roots come off the trunk. And so oftentimes that is, this one is properly exposed because you are just seeing where the top of the roots are. You know, so what you do not want is it up like here or
Yeah.
like you say down here. But you generally, especially with a smaller plant, like there's going to be erosion, there's going to be other stuff going on with a smaller plant. A lot of times, you know, if you get the root flare, like, you know, really near the surface, the roots are going to kind of like figure it out themselves. The real danger is when you have a more mature plant, one that's several years old, and you plant it too deep. But first, I would really make sure, like before you dig it up, gently scrape away with your fingers or trowel or whatever and see where the actual roots do come out. But you don't want the whole root. You don't want the bottom or even half of that top root out of the soil. You just want to make sure that the top of that root is at soil level. So if you want to like send me pictures or something like that, that's fine too. You know, I'll see or post it on the Facebook group and other members can advise as well.
Okay. Yeah, I'll do that. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm such a huge fan of properly planted trees that have those beautiful root flares that I will like, when we're driving, I'm like smacking my husband, look at that tree, it's so beautifully planted. My question is though, the opposite, if you plant too high, what detriment does that have? If you're trying to be super careful of allowing that root flare to be exposed, what if you judge the wrong way and you're too high?
Well, the thing is like with roots is they don't develop bark like a trunk does. So they are meant to be under the soil in like more direct contact with the water. So they don't have the same type of protective coating over them as above ground things, the parts do. Of course, soil does erode over time and the root can develop bark because you'll see that with these roots that are indeed exposed. But when we plant a tree, that tissue on the root is still used to being underground. So if it's too high, it can be exposed to pests, to desiccation, drying out from the elements, to other things, even just being stepped on. It's not as hardy as, you know, like is bark. So that's part of the big danger. And you never really want because the air can just like dry it out, especially if the root is so high that the underside is exposed. And it's also more pests can get under there because that's just like a welcome sign to voles.
So it would be okay to kind of backfill in around that to try and level it out, do you think?
Yeah, like if your roots are too high, certainly like I said, if the bottom's exposed or even like half of the root, if it's a young root that hasn't already developed the bark, but if you got the bark on there already, you don't have to worry about it. Like if the tree kind of did that naturally over time, the soil eroded or the root, just like the way the rocks and stuff were in the root thickened and grew, it will develop the bark on it. So if it did it naturally, I wouldn't worry about it. It's more like when you're planting it and those roots don't have any kind of protective bark over the top that you want to be concerned about it. And then yes, in that case, it's you can backfill a little bit, but of course, if the way you're backfilling, if it's susceptible to erosion, you just want to keep your eyes on it because the soil may, want to erode to get back down to that overall ambient soil level.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Thank you very much. There's another good question. Rick says, as someone who winter sowed tray loads of seeds last week, good for you, Rick. I wish I had done that already. He's curious to the impact of increased temperature, global warming, average degree days, and its impact on native plants. Should we look to different ecoregions to deal with that?
There's no, there's no established standard yet with the climate change. Like on the best practices for that is sort of, like what a lot of people are trying to figure out now. There's so many other factors. That was one thing, like when I showed the different things with the ecoregions, there's so many other factors that affect successful plant growth than temperature. Like, climate change is not going to affect the photoperiod, the length of the days. And unless it increases cloudiness so much that, like our days are just like, shorter because like they're sort of like, they're just like excessive clouds in the morning and at night. But for the most part, it's not going to affect a lot of these other things. And then the other thing is that climate change is going to be happening gradually. So like, especially if we're planting something like an herb that's got a 5 or 7 year lifespan, climate's not going to change that much by the time, that plant dies. So to me, it doesn't make any sense to plant a plant that isn't going to live long enough, for the climate to have changed enough for that plant to no longer be viable. And also the other thing is that, there are a couple things. One thing is I personally don't want to be responsible for the extinction of any plant. So I want to give my native plants that are native to Pennsylvania the longest fighting chance they have possible. If they're going, if anything is going to need pampering, it's going to be the native plants that are possibly facing extinction in natural areas because of climate change. In our gardens, we are actively maintaining them, whether we think of it that way or not, just by weeding. We're doing away with competition. So we are basically artificially maintaining even our natural areas, because with invasive plants and everything, you can't just let a natural plant community go by itself. It just cannot happen. So we are actively maintaining things. So in my opinion, we should be actively maintaining the plants that are in actual danger of disappearing in the wild, because we don't know if the wildlife, how long it's going to take them to adjust to it. So the birds that relied on those seeds for the, for the nutrients to migrate, if those plants are gone because, I just planted crepe myrtle or something, but those birds needed those specific berries, they planted on them to stop here and get those for their migration, then we're also impacting that way. So the only thing that kind of makes sense to me at this point is to, if anything, just like if you are planting things that have a long lifespan, say more than a decade or two, then, like your woody plants, then try to plant ones that are native here, but that tolerate warmer temperatures. So you do look at the range of the zones then, and you make sure that it's hardy, like, I don't know if hardy's the right word for the warmth, but that it tolerates those warmer temperatures. So for instance, if I'm in zone 6 right now, that could be zone 8 in 50 years. I want a plant that grows, that is like, hardy from zone, say 5 to 8 or 5 to 9 or something. So you make sure it is still native to our ecoregion, but that it will tolerate the warmer temperatures that are expected within its lifetime. Because I personally want this change to occur as slowly as possible, to give the time for wildlife, to give them as much time as possible to adjust before their plants disappear.
great points. And the more plants we put in the ground, the more carbon we're sequestering and the bigger effect we can have on global warming to begin with. So
right.
that's the double.
And this gets also to the point of diversity, planting a diverse number of species, because we also don't know what pests are going to be more active because of climate change, much less be introduced that has nothing to do with climate change. So, like look what happened to our ash trees with the emerald ash borer. Who knows what other pests are going to be introduced. So climate change isn't the only stressor that these plants are under. There's development, pollution, climate change, pesticides, all kinds of stuff, introduced pests, introduced competing plants and invasive plants. New species are going to be introduced to those too. So the more we have a diversity of native plants, the more the individual plant species are going to, be able to survive because fewer of them will be impacted by the different changes.
Yep. You are right. And Shannon also wants us to all remember no mulch volcanoes on our trees, which is so important because you can't see that beautiful root flare if you've got it covered in mulch.
Right.
All right, Mark, thank you so much. Does anyone have any other questions before I have Mark stop sharing his and I will re-share my screen?
Exit out. Let me figure out how to stop sharing. I have to expand Zoom. Expand Zoom.
Oh, you know what? I can just take over.
Can you make me stop sharing? Yes.
I can.
Oh, stop share. Okay.
I love the power. Okay.
Yes, yes. You do seem power hungry. No, I'll go on mute now.
I'm going to take over the world with native plants.
Yay.
Okay, so thank you again, Mark. I want to talk with everybody about some upcoming opportunities that we have come up with. And this would get even better with an information coordinator. Is that what I titled that czar of information for us? But 10 million trees. Let me bring up my handy dandy thing here. 10 million trees is a project that you can get free native trees and shrubs, complete with tree tubes and stakes because they are teeny tiny seedlings and bare root trees. Visit 10milliontrees.org to find out more and to contact your local partner. Supplies are limited and go quickly. So we are talking about Chester County and Montgomery County right now are the only two that we have touched base with, but lots of counties in PA coordinate with this program. It started out as a Chesapeake Bay riparian buffer kind of solution, but it's expanded to other areas and away from the specific Chesapeake Bay. So look into that. Lots of webinars are coming up. I'm really excited about this series through the Ohio State. It's Zooms. It's once a week on Fridays for 6 weeks, and they're talking about native plant specific. Their recordings are available on their website also, but their registration is super easy. You click it once and you can register for all of them at the same time. Really nice. I just found out about this one that's coming up next week, inviting biodiversity into our gardens. This session 1 is it's a 3-hour session on Wednesday, January 12th, talking about selecting and sourcing plants to create ecologically vibrant and resilient gardens. The first of 5, this session will cover the integrity of plants species in our gardens. Our presenters will address the native versus cultivar dilemma and how to choose and locate the most ideal species for your garden. Participants will start to create a foundation for gardens that are both pleasing to our eyes as well as beneficial to local wildlife. And they have really great speakers. Yulie Lorimer, the director of horticulture at the Native Plant Trust. They have Claudio Vasquez, the co-owner of Isle Plants. And they also have Sam Hoodley from Mount Cuba Center, who is the horticultural research manager there, about knockout natives. So it's free, guys, and we can learn all this great stuff from all of these professionals. So check that out. Then there is a paid symposium by New Directions in the American Landscape later in the month that you can check out. This one I just found out about. This is a year-long webinar series through the Monarch joint venture. These are free 1-hour lectures on Tuesday afternoons. I can't make those, but they have some really interesting topics specific to monarchs mostly, but what helps the monarch typically will help lots of pollinators. So those are some free monthly webinars and a unique opportunity to hear from interdisciplinary experts on the front lines of pollinator conservation. Tuesdays at 12 o'clock is when they are. Ecological Landscape Alliance is another organization that does a lot of webinars, and they have a conference coming up in February that would be worth attending. That one is also, you have to pay to go to that one. We as a chapter are excited to be participating at the Philly Home and Garden Show this year. We're looking for members who want to volunteer their time for the tabling event. We will be hopefully giving a presentation at some point on their main stage to talk to all these people who come to check out the latest and greatest Comcast gadgets about native plants, and they might not even know about native plants. So it's a really great opportunity for us to spread the word to people who don't know yet. I wanted to point out that Mark is giving some great classes along with other class opportunities at Morris Arboretum. And I know that he had said to check out his website. I do have it here, and we'll make sure that it gets into the newsletter. But I wasn't sure, Mark, if you wanted me to share it. So we will get it in there so people can access you. And then this is our 2022 schedule of events. I'm going to try and move this a little in case you can't see it. Some things are subject to change a little bit, but as you can see, I'm very excited that Mark's agreed to do 3 other presentations for us this year that meet our design themes, so we can progress with Mark through this whole year. We also have some other great presenters that are going to be doing some things for us. And this is just our meeting calendar. The next page, if I can get to it. So this here tells you, if you can see, it's like Wednesday, then a Thursday, Wednesday, Thursday, Wednesday, Thursday. We alternate to try and accommodate for people who have a certain requirement on certain days to make it more accessible to more people. But our meetings are always recorded. I can't get to the next slide there. And then we have some tentative field trips and things that we'd like to do. We want to do a community garden planting at Phoenixville's community garden as a demonstration garden for native plants and pollinators. Originally, we had planned to do it in early March. The garden is going to be going through some renovations, so we're waiting to finalize, get some kind of answers on their timeline and things. We're not sure if we're going to actually do the planting in the spring or if we're going to hold off till after their renovation or if we're going to kind of do both. So stay tuned for that. Anything with a question mark is tentative, except for this mid-April. While this meeting was happening, I was finalizing. We're actually going to do it on Thursday, April 14th at 1:30. Jaja, I think that's the way you say it. I apologize if it isn't. In Doylestown has this several acre property that she has been removing invasives and replacing with natives, and she's created this great ecosystem. She has a beaver that moved in and has done some really neat things. So we're going to take a tour specifically to talk about the ways she has tackled invasives and what she has done to create these great natural ecosystems. So I'm really excited about that. We will have kind of a sign up email that goes out to say that you're interested so we can coordinate parking and whatever. As you can see with this, we try and have a healthy mix of daytime during the week, evening during the week, weekend activities so that everybody has an opportunity. And we try to spread it around this large area that we cover, because I understand that not everybody wants to drive over an hour to get to every event. So we're going to try and mix it up and do the best we can. I wanted to let you know that the native plant sales are kind of starting to put out there that they have opening dates and times, but the first one that has made it official is the Perfume and Watershed Conservancy's native plant sale. Their online ordering starts on April 18th. If you're not familiar with them, they are a really great conservation organization that works to plant natives, works on riparian buffers and keeping our watersheds clean. They are in Montgomery County, I believe. So they have a really great native plant sale, but online ordering takes place for that 3-week period. And then they have the in-person sale and pickup on Mother's Day weekend. And when you make your order online, you have to pick a date and time during that Mother's Day weekend to pick up. It's a very well organized sale. They did a great job transitioning from an in-person sale to an online sale when COVID hit. And Beth there is just a great person and great resource. So I highly recommend them. The Lancaster Wildflower Festival has historically happened on this week, the weekend in April of the 23rd. It has not been released yet, and I do have an email out to them to check to see, but that is a really neat event that has a lot of partners that go and have vendor tables that talk about lots of things native plant related, and then they have a lot of vendors who go to sell native plants, so you can find some things that you don't find at even your local native plant retailers. So it's an interesting afternoon to spend. Hawk Mountain's native plant sale is typically the weekend of May 14th. I am in talks with Bowman Hill about getting a guided tour on Sunday, May 15th. We're still trying to nail down to see if that date will work, so more to come on that. And then Thursday, May 19th, for sure, we are having a presentation by Ethan Kaufman at Stone Lee in person. So that's going to be really exciting. And he's going to talk to us about designing with native plants and the things that they've done there at Stone Lee, which is amazing. And then sometime during the summer, we're going to take a guided tour at Octoraro Farm, which is a wholesale native plant nursery that is not as easily accessible as Octoraro is or as North Creek is. So we've got some fun things planned already, and we're the 5th day into January. So I'm very excited about what this year holds for us. With that, I'm going to check the chat and see if there's anything I have to address. Yay, Rita, thank you. Anybody who sends a chat that they want to do something, please email me, because I don't always get access to the chats again. What's the website for the first one you mentioned about biodiversity? Let me go back, Marilyn, a screen or two, and I will try and find that answer for you. Biodiversity is probably this one, Marilyn.
That's the one.
Yes, it
But
is.
I didn't see the who does it.
It is the Western Reserve Land Conservancy. I thought that I put
Okay.
their website. I will make sure it's just off the screen, I think. But I will make sure that Susan has it to put in the newsletter so that you can
Thank you.
have access to that. Rita, I love volunteering with you, so I'm glad you can come to the Philly show with me. Shannon, I agree. Mount Cuba Center, we definitely are. We're in the works with talking with them about doing a group lecture tour kind of thing there. So stay tuned for that. Zach, you have to go to Mount Cuba Center because it's amazing there. And I have 2 classes yet to complete for their ecological landscape design certification, and it has been a phenomenal time. If you can go through that training program, it's really great. Unfortunately, it's an hour and 10-minute drive from me, so doing that once or twice a week all of last year was a challenge, but it's a great time. Yes, we're definitely doing more group trips. Thanks for going to Mark. Anyone know how to save those chats with the videos? I believe that sometimes they are saved. It depends. Jenkins does great walks tours on Wednesdays in the spring. I will share and jot that down to look at their schedule. Not on Wednesdays. I'll look at it. Okay. Mark, what is the website you mentioned that has a good picture of root flares?
Yeah, I just responded to her privately. It was the one that from the Pennsylvania Native Plant Gardening Facebook group. That there was a whole discussion on that, but you know, we could probably download the graphic and you could send it out or something, you know, with the notes or something.
Okay, great. Okay, somebody's telling me how to save the chat, so you're probably all seeing that 3 dots at the bottom. A winter ID talk at Jenkins. Apparently there's a really good one there. I would love to look at that. Oh, winter ID by looking at buds and bark. That sounds very interesting. I wonder if we've missed that. I will look into it. Okay, I think that I have oh, there's Zach shared the link.
Mark, is your Facebook page listed on your website for those of us whose brains forget things immediately?
No, I can put it there, and I should say it's not I didn't start the group, and I'm not the administrator. I'm one of the moderators. It's just that I just like happen to be one of the more active or enthusiastic moderators. But yeah.
Zach, Mr. IT guy, put it in the chat for me.
Yay.
That's awesome. Thank you, Zach.
We in the group very much appreciate your enthusiasm, because it's a highlight of my day that comes through my feed, and I get to see, you know, Mark does the Wildlife Wednesdays and just all sorts of very enlightening native plant based information.
Well, thank you. I always enjoy your comments and your you know, everything you do with wild ones. I think it's amazing that you started the you know, the chapter and everything, and really want to thank you and the other people who did it with you.
It's definitely been a blast for sure. Anything else, guys? Is there anything I'm forgetting? I'm so excited because there's so many fun things that we're doing this year, but we just keep adding more and more. So if you come across things, shoot me an email, let us know. But other than that, Zach, do you have something?
Yeah. I picked out a preschool for my daughter, and she's starting next fall. It's called Goshen Friends in Westchester, and they don't have any native plants. And I'm thinking, how could I start the conversation? I'm thinking there's maybe two points that would be good. One would be like just overall beautification, where if you have plants that attract butterflies, you see butterflies, and baby birds need caterpillars, so it helps the birds. And then the other one would be like, if it's milkweed, it's a very interesting looking plant, and there's pods, and the kids could harvest the pods, and that's something that's interesting for them from
They like to
making
play with it,
memories.
too. They love
Yeah.
to play with the milkweed.
Yeah. I have a video of my daughter playing with the milkweed, and I put the fluff in my hand, and she was blowing on it like you would blow a bubble, and it goes in the air. So you're totally right.
Jesse always lures kids into our tabling events by asking the kids, "Do you guys know you can plant butterflies?" Yeah, and that even a lot of parents turn their head like, "What are you talking about?" And the kids get real interested, and that's a good gateway question to teach.
Yep, that's great, Zach. When you get to the planting stage, depending on the size that they'll let you plant there, we'll have to get you flats and things to make that happen. The bigger the better.
Cool.
All right, guys. Anything, Susan? Anything else I'm forgetting? Think you're good? Well, I think that for our new members, this was a wonderful introduction to the year and to the chapter. I look forward to seeing you all next month at our meeting. And if you need anything between now and then, reach out, let me know. But I think that we are good for tonight.
Thank you, Mark and Jesse.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. It was a good meeting.
Yeah, they always are, right?
Right.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Right.
Jesse,
Yes.
you there?
Yeah.
I might have to procure your help to possibly try to reach out to your native plant nurseries and seed suppliers and try to get them to possibly advertise in the upcoming CCBA conference program. We need to get more of that, what true conservation is, and that's habitat, not beekeeping with non-native insects.
Right. Yeah, sounds like a good idea.
And if you had any speakers in mind that, maybe were a little pricey, we might be able to convince them to speak at the conference and have the CCBA pay for it, because they really want a lot of speakers this year. So if there's any speakers that you were reaching out to, you said that were kind of pricey, maybe out of range for the, the chapter, and, maybe, George is very native plant friendly and habitat creating friendly.
Right.
So if you can think of, any possible speakers like that, creating meadows and stuff like that.
Okay. Let me end this meeting and I will come find you.
Oh, you know where I live?
Bye.
Bye.